welcome back to the Jones Chronicles History. I would love to call this podcast That's What I Call History, but I'm pretty sure someone's already patented that shit. I'm your host, Christina. What we discuss here is Black Americans in history past that slavery period that we do tend to heavily focus on in American textbooks, but we have so much more history in the world besides that. So this is my attempt to contribute to society by finding stories and articles and things like that that are relevant, that expand our knowledge of our actual history and not the ones just written in textbooks by non-minorities. So 2 articles I have stumbled across, I think that we'll be able to cover in the 30 minutes here, is the divide between blacks and the Irish, as well as we might get through most of this article in regards to before race mattered, what archives tell us about early encounters in the French colonies. So our French history, or our black influence in French history, there we go, as well as Irish influence as well, because as we had discussed in the Jones Chronicles before I started to just segue this one directly focused on history, is that there is a lot of integration there, particularly when it comes to early American history, due to the fact that, black derogatory, those terminologies were associated with Irish just as much as they were associated with Africans or African Americans. So the divide between blacks and the Irish is written by Noel Ignatieff. He published this in 2010. The Irish who immigrated to America in the 18th and 19th centuries were fleeing caste oppression and a system of landlordism, that is quite the word to say, that made the material conditions of the Irish peasant comparable to those of an African or an American slave. The Penal Laws regulated every aspect of Irish life and established Irish Catholics as an oppressed race. If you do not know too much about the Penal Laws, it's huge in the history of Ireland. It's a series of laws imposed to attempt to force Irish Catholics, and to a lesser extent, Protestants and Quakers, to accept the Church of Ireland, the established Church of Ireland, which is more Protestant, which led to a lot of civil and radicalized wars between the two continents. That's a whole other long history to go through, but that is a very, very short insight into that. Anticipating Judge Roger B. Taney's famous dictum in the Dred Scott decision, on 2 occasions officials with judiciary authority in Ireland declared that the law does not suppose any such person to exist as an Irish Roman Catholic. When they first began arriving here, America, in large numbers, the Irish were, in the words of Mr. Dooley, a character created by journalist Finley Peter Doone, given a shovel and told to start digging up the place as if they owned it. On the rail beds and canals, they labored for low wages under dangerous conditions. In the South, they were occasionally employed where it did not make sense to risk the life of a slave. As they came to cities, they were crowded into districts that became centers of crime, vice, and disease. I'm sure most have seen, well, maybe not most, but at least heard of the Gangs of New York, or the Gangs of New York, famous Leonardo DiCaprio movie. Actually wasn't too bad either. I remember enjoying it, but of course that story changed when you get into Tammany Hall and all of that corruption, but that's also another story for another time. But it's interesting to know that a slave's life was valued because there's profit there. There's something that was bought there. There's something that you're trying to keep in relatively good shape for the benefit of what a slave would offer African Americans in particular, because they can get out there in that fucking heat in any weather and work fucking very hard. So that was considered a commodity versus Irish that were considered less than a commodity than even a slave. They commonly found themselves thrown together with free Negroes. Blacks and the Irish fought each other and the police, socialized, and occasionally intermarried, and developed a common culture of the lowly. They also both suffered the scorn of those better situated. Along with Jim Crow and Jim Dandy, the drunken, belligerent, and foolish Patrick and Bridget were stock characters on the early stage. If you do go back and look at most of those Jim Crow law era types of signs, you'll see no blacks, no Irish, and then I think the last one is like no pets or something, but we were pretty linked up together. Americans had a really hard time dealing with or had a distrust of Catholics in general, but particularly Irish Catholics, because they like that was the biggest hang up with JFK, him getting elected. I think he is still the only Irish Catholic president to be elected, or the Catholic president to be elected, because of the huge suspicion of then, you know, they'll somehow collude with the Pope and Americans are fucking weird. In antebellum America, it was speculated that if racial why do you want me to say this? Amalgamation was ever to take place, it would begin between those two groups. As we know, things turned out otherwise. So they expected us to rise up against them, but instead, unfortunately, which is really pretty sad, and I think a lot of Irish Americans forget this particular part of history, they used their lighter skin to their advantage and really tried to assimilate, and thus turn their backs on Black Americans that were in the same lower class to uplift their class of society. And that's not from the article, that is from me. In 1841, 60,000 Irish in Ireland issued an address to their compatriots in America, calling upon them to join the abolitionists in the struggle against slavery. 6 months after the address, the abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison wrote that they may be the saddest words ever written about the Irish diaspora. Even to this hour, not a single Irishman has come forward, either publicly or privately, to express his approval of the address or to avow his determination to abide by its sentiments. What explains the attitude of people whose experience in Ireland and the United States one might have thought would predispose them to sympathy with all victims of slavery and racial oppression. It was not the inevitable consequence of blind historic forces, still less of biology, but of choices made among available alternatives. In 1834, a mostly Irish mob in Philadelphia rampaged through the Black District. By the time they subsided, 2 Black people were killed and many beaten. 2 churches and upwards of 20 homes were laid to waste, their contents looted or destroyed. A committee appointed to investigate the riot identified as a principal cause the belief that some employers were hiring Black workers over whites. Such events were common at the time. No less a witness than Abraham Lincoln warned in 1837 that, quote, accounts of outrages committed by mobs formed the everyday news of the times. Black workers had traditionally been an important part of the waterfront workforce in New York, Philadelphia, and other northern cities, as well as Baltimore, Charleston, New Orleans, and other southern ports. In 1850, Irish laborers in New York demanded the dismissal of a Black laborer who was working alongside them. So it becomes a dominance game. The same type of dominance game that was predisposition in there. I mean, that's just what society does. It's sad, right? It's always got to be a hierarchy. And the fact that they at least were quote unquote white meant that they had a high, or should be given a hierarchy over the Black Americans that were in those low positions already to change the pendulum, as it will. And because so many came over due to the Irish famine, they were a huge voting majority in states, whereas Black Americans, as you know, were not allowed the right to vote. During the strike of 1852 and again in 1855, 1862, and 1863, Irish longshoremen battled Black workers who had been brought in to take their places. The underlying cause of the New York riot of 1863, misnamed the Draft Riot, was the employment of Black workers on the docks. According to one historian, in Philadelphia, as in New York, Irish gangs not only drove Blacks out of jobs, they also served as surrogate unions. And you get Tammany Hall, which is exactly how they maintain their power. There, the race riot of 1849 and the longshore strike of 1851 were simply different tactical phases of the same struggle. In August 1862, a largely Irish mob in Brooklyn attacked the Black employees, chiefly women and children, who were working in a tobacco factory. The mob, having driven the Black employees to the upper stories of the building, then set fire to the first floor. The factory was allowed to reopen only when the employer promised to dismiss the Negroes and hire Irish. Irish attitudes toward the free Negro in the North led them to oppose abolition. In 1838, an Irish mob burned just completed Pennsylvania Hall, built by subscription to serve as a center for abolitionist meetings. It was not that the Irish supported slavery. They would have been happy to see slavery abolished, provided all the Black folks could have been kept on the plantations or shipped out of the country altogether. Does that not sound familiar? I don't know why that's just go back home. Just go back to where you were forcibly removed and or keep them where they are and then they're fine. That's not that's just slavery with a few extra steps. Since such an outcome could not be guaranteed throughout the 19th century, they were solid supporters of the Democratic Party. Remember, that was the party that was pro-slavery, which before the Civil War protected slavery in the South, and after the war sought to restrict the rights of the freed people. Some have pointed to competition for jobs as the cause of Irish animosity towards Blacks, but in the wage system, all workers compete for jobs. It is not free competition that leads to enduring animosity, but its absence. The competition among Irish and Black laborers failed to lead to unity because it did not take place under normal labor market conditions, but was distorted by the color line. However, much of the Irish were opposed as a race in Ireland and exploited as workers in America. Once landed in Boston, New York, or Philadelphia, they enjoyed one marked advantage over refugees from Southern slavery. No one was chasing them with dogs.
Run.
So kind of going back to the original statement I was alluding to earlier, it became a matter of there is a color line here, and at least we're on that color line. Now, the Irish do have a huge, long history of oppression themselves, so coming over to America and having that slight advantage was so much to them. So much. And while it's easy, of course, to sit back in the 21st century and go, well, you know, it should have been better, this, that, and the other thing, because there were people that were. I mean, that's we always want to say the times were the times. Yes, they were the times, but you always find people in the times that defined or defied the status quo. You know, not every person who signed the Declaration of Independence was a slave owner. So they'd be like, well, everybody was a slave. Nope. Everybody wasn't a slave owner. John Adams wasn't a slave owner. His wife was, but he wasn't. There are more people that were against slavery and actually, you know, just didn't own slaves, and they had just as much of a voice in society than some of the other folks. So to act like it was the norm. It was the norm, but to say that that's the only way, that's not true. But there also is the testament to the fact that people will react to the times, and the only way, I mean, if you're sitting and you're suffering in a 1-bedroom, and you know, it moralistically, people are, I should say, are slippery slopes when you are in a destitute. Hunger, starvation, poverty, that's where you have crime. That's why crime is so high in those particular places, because when you have little to lose, what is morality to you then? Some people, they do have that integrity, but it's not to say that I can't understand someone looking at their child on a dirt floor, you know, have had 4 babies and 3 of them have died from diphtheria because you live in an unsanitary condition, that's not going to somehow distort your thinking of your moralistic code. I guess that's where I'm saying. I'm not saying it's right, I'm saying it's wrong. I'm saying I see how it happens, no matter how I feel about how it happened. Does that make sense? What's truly sad is the KKK, which is a more, in case people don't know, Scottish. It's a Scottish-Irish. It's complicated, but it also shows very deeply the ignorance of the KKK in itself. I mean, I've always said racism is ignorant, but the funny thing is KKK is anti-Catholic, which Irish are Catholics. So it's weird that the KKK has a lot of Scottish-Irish code in it, but it is in itself against the very people it supposedly is upholding. Yeah. It's like sending a reporter out to a Trump rally and asking them a question and then getting the answer, and you're like, what?
You stupid.
Inferiority can definitely drive people to want to become the superiority. It's why so many white Americans so fear Black people taking over, you know, all the jobs and this and government. You know, they feel that superiority, once it's lost, then the cycle shall repeat itself. And that's not to say it wouldn't, but I also think that it's proven in this country, at least, that and pretty much all over the rest of the world, quite frankly, that's not the case. That just because that's your story, unfortunately, doesn't mean it's meant or going to be the story if the roles were reversed. And if that's what you truly feel, then take a good look at your own fucking life and history and take some accountability there. Don't be acting so shocked and surprised then when a Black person is like, Black Lives Matter. I don't understand why you say that, because all lives should matter. Okay. He continues in his article, in Less of My Rant. A few years back, I was a guest on a radio call-in show. One of the callers, identifying himself as Irish American, asked, if we made it, why couldn't they? Meaning Black people. What most appalled me about his question, more than the willful ignorance it showed of how the white skin privilege system had operated, was his belief that he had, quote, made it. If his experience was like that of most, quote unquote, white working class Americans, making it meant a job he hated and was afraid to lose, a house that was falling down around him, and 2 weeks vacation a year spent either fixing it up or breathing noxious fumes on a highway clogged with motor vehicles on their way to stand in line at an amusement park in the company of a spouse with whom he has nothing in common and children who hate him. Oh, shit! Oh, shit! Oh, shit! Oh my God, that was the best drag I've heard in my life. That was so fucking good. But it also brings so much clarity to something. You know, we can make it. We could just go out there and make it. Not like, the whole entire government system decided public housing is where we're going to segregate people. It's not like banks don't give loans, like we didn't institutionalize. It's not like we had voting rights. Like, what kind of, as he stated, the willful ignorance of this person to ask such a stupid question. Not only that, it's just, what are you really comparing it to? Right? At least when you had those lower society families, there was a sense of community, a sense of care, a sense of leisure, a sense of something more than this fucking system that really is purely defined by a lot of really other fucked up things. Like the fact that women are chatels or broodmares for the state and shouldn't have an idea in their minds other than to mind the damn house and me, and whom I can rape as a person and have no consequences. Like, that's the whole thing, right? We're chasing this whole white idea as if that somehow is, other than the fact that you get some perks in life, doesn't mean you're having a happy life. You're just having an easier life. He finishes, imagine how different the outcome might have been or had his Irish ancestors chosen to act differently a century ago. He also has titled an article entitled a book, How the Irish Became White, which you can purchase on Amazon. I think I am going to purchase that book for $21. And the link to this article will definitely be below. So I thought that was a good insight as someone from the culture speaking. That's one thing I like. I'm like with Bill Burr. Don't write a fucking article about how rich men are pigs if you're a woman, because you don't know what it's like to have a dick. I don't want to read a book about a man telling me about pregnancy or what it's like to have a pussy. I don't want that. I want to hear from those that stand and live in their truth. So I don't think we're going to get to this other article, and quite frankly, it doesn't actually mesh well with the fact that I'm talking about Black and Irish and then just moving over to France, as if that isn't a whole, I can go on and on about that as well. So we'll stick with Black and Irish history by finishing up with the article 5 Facts You Likely Didn't Know About Irish Black History Month, written by Faida Jailer. Yes, Irish Black History Month is a thing. As you may or may not know, during the month of October, Black History Month is celebrated in several countries around the world, and one of those countries is Ireland. Irish Black History Month first began in Cork in 2010, although it wasn't until 2014 that it was consolidated as a nationwide event. It was facilitated by a network of groups who work together through Africa Irish Development Initiatives to host a series of events in celebration of the African Irish community.
Oh my God! Wow! Oh my God!
I absolutely did not know this at all. Not even a little bit. So here we are, learning together. That's what I like. So let's discuss the 4 or 5 facts that she wants us to know. Number 1, Tony Small. You might be interested to know that one of the earliest accounts of a Black presence on mainland Ireland was that of Tony Small, a freed, formerly enslaved African American who had saved the Irish aristocrat Lord Edward Fitzgerald. If the name Lord Edward Fitzgerald rings a bell, it's because he was the Irish aristocrat who famously abandoned his esteemed position as an Irish parliamentarian and a veteran soldier in the British Army in order to fight for Irish independence. Lord Edward Fitzgerald had fought on the side of the British in the American Revolutionary War and, gravely wounded, had been rescued by an escaped enslaved man called Tony Smalls after the Battle of Eutaw Springs. From then on, Tony became Lord Fitzgerald's servant and accompanied him to Ireland In 1786, Tony's portrait was painted by artist John Roberts, which you can see linked in this article that I will have in the show notes. Number 2, the Black Siren. Long before there was the incredible Whitney Houston or the imitatable Aretha Franklin, there was another black songstress superstar. Her name was Rachel Baptiste. Rachel was a black Irish singer and musician known as the Black Siren. From 1750 to 1775, she performed throughout Ireland and organized numerous concerts with her husband, fellow musician known only as Mr. Crow. Over her 25-year career, Rachel performed for audiences across Ireland, including for the Irish dramatist John O'Keeffe, who described her as being received with great delight by the audience. Number 3, frequented by abolitionists, something I did know. At the height of the transatlantic slave trade, Ireland was visited by a number of well-known former enslaved people turned abolitionists, including Aluda, I may be saying that wrong, Equiano, Charles Lennox Raymond, and Frederick Douglass. Alado, I'm not going to say that right. Alado Equiano was a Nigerian British abolitionist and writer and one of the key members of the Sons of Africa movement. His biography, in which he recounted his lived experiences of slavery, helped pass legislation in the UK abolishing the slave trade. Equiano visited Dublin and Belfast in the 1790s, as well as other countries around Ireland, where he said he was very kindly received. Charles Lennox Raymond was an activist and abolitionist from Massachusetts. In 1841, he embarked on a tour of the UK and Ireland to raise awareness of the horrors of slavery and raise support for the abolitionist movement, both in the US and the UK. In Dublin, his lectures were said to draw large crowds. It actually makes that first part of our story, rather sad that the Irish and American didn't speak out, even though their own countrymen did. And last but by no means least, in 1845, the iconic African-American abolitionist and author Frederick Douglass spent 4 months in Ireland, which he described as transformative. He even referred to himself as the Black O'Connell, a reference to the revered Irish Catholic emancipator Daniel O'Connell, whom he met during his time there. Former U.S. President Barack Obama commented on this historical meeting when he visited Ireland in 2011.
Obama say what it do.
Number 4, Africans in the Irish language. Part of Ireland's rich cultural heritage is the Irish language, which Black residents have learned and actively fought to preserve. One famous example is Osam Tassani, who was a South African expat living in Ireland at the beginning of the 20th century. He was notable for speaking fluent Irish and being the first known person of African origin to speak the Galway Gaeltacht dialect of Irish. He was listed in the 1911 census as living in Galway. Nowadays, the Irish radio presenter Ola Maje Koldunmi, who is a passionate Irish language activist, hosts a radio show Afra Air on Radio Na Life, I think so, or Radion Life, 106.4 FM, in which she features music by African and Afro-Irish artists. In 2020, she was voted onto the board of Foras na Gaelage, the public body responsible for the promotion of the Irish language throughout Ireland. That's pretty cool. And number 5, the first Black Miss Ireland. History was made in 2021 when Pamela Uba became the first Black woman to be crowned Miss World Ireland. Born in South Africa to Nigerian parents in 1996, she moved to Ireland age 7. Pamela went on to study medical science at undergraduate level before earning a master's degree in clinical chemistry. She worked as a medicinal scientist at University Hospital, Galway. Pamela being crowned Miss Ireland 2021 is significant because she is the first Black woman in Ireland's history to win. Before her, in 2019, Fionnuala O'Reilly became the first Black woman to represent Ireland internationally and to compete in the Miss Universe pageant. And there is a link to learn more, because there is a Freedom is Mine YouTube channel that the author has linked in the article as well. This, of course, is just a snippet of history between the Black and Irish culture. There's so much more to delve into, to learn about, which we will continue to do in the week. I think next week we're going to go ahead and discuss a little Black history in France and their colonies in particular. I think we all know about Haiti, but there's a lot more to be discussed there. And I look forward to that. If you have any suggestions, articles, you wrote one that you want me to read, anything like that, hey, drop it into blackgirlcouch@gmail.com. Even if you want to just comment below on the podcast, you can do that as well. Or if you have topics that you want to hear about or hear researched, definitely let me know. I am down for all things knowledge. My social media will be there as well. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Until the next time, peace, hair grease, black or magic.